started, just to kind of kick it off on a light note, I'd love to kind of just start out with a little bit of an icebreaker, since it has been so long since we've been together. So since school has started back up, we're starting back the spring semester, there's a lot of stuff going on. So I would love for us all in the chat to post something that's exciting that's going on either this week or since you've been back, or maybe even like you're gearing up to start something really exciting with what's going on in your work. So if you'll take a minute to post in the chat, we'll get started that way. So as we were busy typing our exciting news, I do want to give you an opportunity to scroll back up and read everyone else's exciting news and make comments as necessary. So I do want to give us a little bit of time to be able to read everyone's responses. Yeah, I was just about to say that too, Robin. It's really exciting to see how much work is people are already diving into it. That's awesome. All right. Well, fantastic. I know it's been, I hope you had a restful and really joyous holiday break with family and friends, and you really are, geared up and excited to, kick off this spring semester. I know that it looks like we have a lot of stuff going on our plate, and I hope that the work that we are doing here together really will help ground and inform some of the decisions that you're making in other work that you're doing. So what I want to do is just go over kind of our norms again, since it's been a while since we've met. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and make sure that I have, hold on just a second. There we go. So are you able to see my screen with the syllabus? Mm-hmm. Okay, so as we started and as we talked about in our first two sessions before the holiday break, our syllabus is really going to be our home base. Everything that we're going to be doing is going to be right here on this syllabus, so it's easy to go back to over and over again, so that you know what are the expectations during our synchronous sessions, and then what are some of the things that you want to work on to be prepared for our next sessions in our asynchronous. So between the holiday break and today, my chat is in my way. We had this as our asynchronous work. So you kind of spent some time exploring some of those starter tasks. You checked out the KDE collection. You looked at some of those other collections that were more, kindergarten through 6th grade or 6th through 12th, to give you kind of an idea of maybe directions that you may want to take. You also made sure that you checked to ensure that you had completed your sessions 1 and 4 or 1 and 3. And then you went into session 4 in the design assignments course to really start your design decisions around selecting your focus standards and thinking about what do you really want to teach and when do you want to teach that next module with the focus standards that you want to select. So with those decisions that you thought about over the course of the break prior to when we met today, now we're really going to look at how you selected those focus standards. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. We're going to really dive into your decision points. We want to hear from you to see if there are some overlaps with different people so that you have thought partners in this group. Also, it's just really nice to talk things through when you first start designing and thinking about those design decisions before you actually dive in and start plugging things into the template. So we are going to ground ourselves back into talking about focus standards. We're going to talk about the task template. And then we will, if we have time, we'll show a few more resources that are available, and then we'll talk about next steps. So as I stated at the very beginning, we do want this to be really 80-20, where we hear a lot from you versus from Kate and I. So we want you guys to make sure that you chime in as necessary and feel free to make comments and start discussions as needed as we go through. So what we're going to do is we have our syllabus always open, and the other tab that we always want to have open is our Learn tab. So make sure that you are logged in. And so we're going to go to our Learn tab right now. And so what we're going to do to really get started is we're going to review focus standards. So we've been really focusing in the design assignments course and the instructional cycle 1. So right before break, we really spent some time analyzing the student work for evidence. Oh, I didn't need to click on it. Analyzing the student work for evidence of focus standards. We coded tasks around seeing evidence of those standards in the assignment. And then as you looked at, you decided kind of some of those choice points on when you wanted to teach the module. And so now we're really going to look at selecting your focus standards. But in session 3, there's a really good review about focus standards. So that's where we're going to go now. So I'm going to click into session 3. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a moment for everyone to reread the Think and Practice, starting with what makes a standards focus cluster work, through the table right here. So you're going to read that section to yourself, and then we'll come back together and discuss. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the direct link in the chat, so it jumps you right to this session in the course. So if you want to click through the chat to get to that session, you can, or you can go through your Learn tab, go to Design Assignments, Instructional Cycle 1, Session 3. So you're going to read from the start of Think and Practice through the graphic, the example, and all the way to this chart. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that now. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen right now. And so what I'd like to do is just take a few minutes to have a brief discussion. So please feel free to unmute and talk. But what are any insights or ahas about the focus standards cluster based on the work that you did in the last 2 weeks thinking about that? And, or what did you just read in the course about focus standards? So what are any insights or ahas that really jump out to you about the focus standards based on what you're thinking about and based on what you just reviewed in the course section?
I'll go first. I'll go first.
Okay.
I had a conversation, one of my teachers that I was talking about in the fact that they're jumping into work. We're actually working with some teachers in an LDC cohort. And so these 2 teachers are kind of inspired by one of their other colleagues that has done LDC work. So they're getting into writing tasks and things like that. So we're kind of helping them through the process. So this particular teacher wanted to look at the content piece of it, but we had to have a conversation about what he wanted to get out of it. And so it was about the depth of knowledge. Like, do you just want them to state what this person did in history, or do you want them to analyze and compare perspectives in how it's represented? And so getting him, and he chose to do that deeper, that higher depth of knowledge. And so it was really cool just to watch him think through that process and help him talk through that process. But it demonstrated just how important it is to have those conversations with teachers, especially in these coaching moments, to help them, encourage them, and to ask them those questions that push them further into what they want their students to do.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was very good. I think that brings a lot in about the, and I'm guilty too. I was a business CTE teacher, and a lot of our content standards, that's what drives what I plan in my classroom every day, the content standards. And so when you look at a lot of my content standards, a lot of them were at that DOK level 1 or 2 in terms of define, explain, those types of things. And so when you think about a focus cluster of standards, yes, I have that content standard, but that reading and that writing really allows for us to think about what is the thinking work that I want my students to do about the content that I'm presenting in the class. So that reading is really like, okay, so what are you wanting them to think about when they're talking about, this content standard? So that's a really good point. Thank you, Rebecca. Anybody else?
I just want to say that working in the cluster, I think, makes it more manageable. which I like, because when I was in the classroom, I would get very overwhelmed sometimes by just wanting to attack too much at one time. So I like the cluster because it forces you to be very specific in your intentions, but without just the chaos of all the standards that you could choose from, just because we feel so pressured to teach everything right now.
That's a really good point, Winnie. I was one of the pilot teachers. I know several of you were involved with LDC when it first came out. It was that Word document. It was this long. It was like, do you want to teach all of the Common Core standards? Do a module. And so it had a list of all 10 reading, all 10 writing. And so you felt like, oh, if I do a module, I'm teaching all of those standards. Well, being able to focus, and then it just became unwieldy where you're teaching a 9-week, 10-week module, and it just drug on and on and on. And you never felt like you were really getting all the rest of the content that you wanted to do in those classrooms. So with the focus standards, to your point, it really does focus, during this set of time, during this week, during this 2-week period that we're doing the module, what is the thinking work? What is the work that I really want to hone in on and be able to do that in a manageable way? I really like that, we've shifted our focus to that. And now when we're really focusing on tasks in this particular instructional cycle, but as we dive into IC2 and IC3, even thinking about the skills list and instruction, it goes back to those focus standards. If I'm choosing, point of view as my reading standard, what types of instruction am I going to do in my ladder that's actually going to help me with point of view? I don't need to do, a bunch of other stuff if my real focus in that writing process writing product is about the point of view. So keeping that in mind as we go through this entire coach certification process is the focus standard really drives that assignment, that overall assignment, but it's also going to really drive our daily instruction and our skills that we select and those mini tasks that we design to support that task to get to that end goal. So that's really great, Whitney. Thank you.
Welcome.
Anyone else? Give it one more person.
I would like to share. I'm making some great connections because I have a district who's digging into learning targets, into the I can statements, and like you said a minute ago, Danielle, the daily teaching. And what's happening at his school is people are really putting like an instructional objective on the board and leaving it there for a month for their daily I can statements. And so digging into the process of creating the learning targets with the knowledge demands, the processing demands, and the product, all the different types of teaching that's going to happen, this little table and the clustering helps reinforce that idea of the different types of demands that are required and that we actually do have to teach to meet that standard.
I love that. I love that, Angie. I love that. One of the things that some people here have heard me say 1,000 times is I think the really, truly special sauce of LDC is that it makes you do both at the same time. So we've gone back and forth in education from having like a really good big theme with no focus or intentionality around the day-to-day. And then it's like the pendulum swung the other way and we got really good at day-to-day and we lost this overarching umbrella thing. And so, yeah, kids can tell you what they're going to do for the next 45 minutes, but have no concept of what we're doing tomorrow, which is not good either. And so LDC, I think, is really good at forcing you to have to do both of those at the same time. So here's what we're doing today for the next 45 minutes. And then here's why. Because for the next 2 weeks, we're doing this. And here's what we're working on. And here's the standard. And it allows you, it's an easy way for a teacher to have that conversation. And it feels natural because we already know what that end task is. We already know where we're going. So it's like built in. The teacher still has to have the conversation every day, but it's built in that is a natural piece of it. And it's not oh, now I have to figure out how to do both of these things at once. It feels like a totally authentic thing to say. And I think that's the real beauty. I mean, there are lots of beauties of LDC, but if I could pick one thing, the fact that it focuses us on both, being able to do both at the same time, I think is really important.
And I think the other thing to think about is Angie was sharing, the terminology around learning targets and things like that. Going back to how we started, our orientation in our week 1 about, it's not about doing LDC. It's about how LDC can support the work that you're doing. So even though you may be calling it learning targets and we may be calling it, LDC module and mini task or skills, like those types of things, you can see that it's really one and the same. And it's just really about good quality practice, good instruction and best practices. So I want us to continue to remember that, because I know, again, as we were reading through the exciting news and things, we were talking about a lot of different work strands that are going on, but really grounding back and really focusing around what's good practice that we're doing in all of our work. So I appreciate all you guys sharing that. So one of the things, I'm going to go back and share my screen again. So in this section, session 3, we did do this together when we were back in December, but I do want to go ahead and scroll down to refresh that you do have examples here to show that color coding, to talk about how those particular standards fit within the task and how that the language of the standards really are present. So you had those examples in the PowerPoint slide that's accessible from the syllabus, but you do have examples here in the coursework as well. And the other thing I want to make sure to point out to you is ensuring that you guys are completing your action items. So going through and in your session, making sure that you start the page by opening, so you'll get that check mark when you open up the session, but you'll see either exercises or action items. So just making sure that when you submit those, that way it'll give you that complete action item. So just want to remind you about that. So our next step is really the selection of your focus standards. So last 2 weeks, you spent some time really looking at when to teach a module, both as part of what you want to guarantee for your students in your curriculum, but also where in the year or in the unit that you want to teach this. So where in the year in the unit that you want students to write in response to reading, and also the specific information you want about your students' progress towards the independence and competence within those standards. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click to the next session, so going into session 4. And at the top of session 4, you have this design star, the entry point star. I love this graphic because there are multiple entry points that we always have when we think about designing a quality assignment. So sometimes you may have a particular text that's a required reading in your unit or in your curriculum scope and sequence. There may be some specific disciplinary content that you have to cover during this time. Or it may be you want to write a particular student writing product. Maybe it's required that you have a lab report or something like that as your entry point to an assignment. But it's important to remember that no matter how you enter into this design star, that you always go back to the standards cluster and think about, even if I'm coming in with a set text, what standards am I going to select that's really going to support the work that I want my students to do with that text? We're not reading To Kill a Mockingbird to read To Kill a Mockingbird. What are the things that I want my students to get out of that, and what standards can I select in order to ensure that they're getting what they need to get out of that text? Same with the disciplinary content, like I stated earlier. I may come in with a particular content standard, but what is the thinking work? What is the focus cluster that I want to select in order to really drive how I want my students to work with that disciplinary content? So there's going to be a lot of decision points that you're going to be making as you design your task. So you do have your focus standard. So it really is a great place to start. But we do understand that you may have to start with a text or select with a content, but make sure that you always go back to those standards to ensure that those are truly aligned with what you're really wanting to do with that. So these last 2 weeks, you've been really thinking about it. So what I want to do now is I want to take some time to think about the decision points you guys actually have been making around the work that you're doing. So you explored some examples to try and you may have been talking with teachers, or you may have some stuff that's upcoming. So you've been making some design decisions. So what I want us to do in the chat right now is identify real quickly so that everyone can see kind of the scope of what everyone is working on. What grade level are you focusing on with your task that you're going to design? Which discipline are you focusing on? And what 3 focus standards will you use to drive the design of your module? So based on the decision points that you've been thinking about over the last 2 weeks for today, what grade level are you focusing on? What discipline are you going to be working with? And what are the 3 focus standards that you have chosen to drive your module? So after you post your answer to those 3 questions, take a minute to check out everyone else's response to see if there's some natural partnerships that you may be able to take note of for collaborative thinking. You know, someone that you may be able to reach out to. So maybe it's, you know, you both are focusing on elementary. Maybe it's science. Maybe it's not the same grade, but maybe it's a science focus. Maybe you guys have selected the same standards, anchor standards, but they may be different grade levels. So you can see how they're building upon each other. So take a minute to look at everyone else's responses to see some of those natural partnerships that you can reach out to and foster while you're working together. Because this is, you know, LDC, Literacy Design Collaborative. We don't want you to have to design these on your own.
And I would also point out that as we're looking at these, a lot of you have picked writing standards, either 1, 2, or 3. I'm not sure there are any 3s. It looks like mostly 1s and 2s. But just remember that writing standard 4, writing standard 5 are just as valid for a standard. So I think sometimes we go to that place where it must be 1 or 2, standard 1 or 2. And if that's what you want to do, then I'm all about it. But don't feel hemmed in by that if 4 is really more appropriate for what you want your kids to do, or if 5 is more appropriate, then do that. Or 7. I mean, don't feel like 1, 2, and 3 are your only options for that.
Whitney, I think the question that you have in terms of informational standards. So when LDC first came out, they had task templates for informational, explanatory, argumentative, and narrative writing. And as we have progressed and seen things out in the field, we really saw that the narrative writing was not necessarily supported well in an LDC module kind of framework. So that may be where you read where LDC is really focused around the argumentative and the informational explanatory writing standards. All right, so you guys have been doing a lot of design decisions. We want to hear from you around, you know, how do you think the 3 standards that you selected are going to work together? You know, why did you choose those particular standards for the grade level and the discipline that you selected? So I want to take some time to hear from each other so that we can, you know, understand the decisions that we chose and why we chose those and how we think that's going to play out in the work that we're going to do moving forward.
I think for me, I chose the data analysis, so the reading and then express words into text into a visual form, and the science standard of periodic trends, because I feel like there's a big misconception with my students where they know the periodic trends, but they don't understand why. They just memorize what the graphs look like, and then they're done with it. And so I think I would really want them to investigate and argue why those trends exist, and then go through an activity where they actually graph it themselves. And then maybe they'll have a deeper understanding about why.
So I see that you selected reading standard 7. Anyone want to give what their mental marker was for 7? I'm going to pull back in terms of making you guys think about what was your reading standard 7 mental marker? Yeah, multimedia. Okay, so in different forms. So thinking about how you explain that, you may be using multimedia or different formats in terms of they're looking at a periodic table. But does anybody else think there might be another reading standard that may support what she's wanting in terms of the thinking work that she may want her students to do around those periodic tables that may support what she, how she's trying to drive? And again, I'm just bringing this up for conversation. Not that you have to change this, Carly, but. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up this way that we have this helpful handout. I always have the college and career readiness booklet open so I can look at the different standards, reading and writing and then you can also do the Common Core mental markers from previous sessions. So I'll let us ponder that a little bit. And Carly, you ponder that as well. Again, just food for thought, thinking about, based on how you described it, is there another reading standard that may support, R7 may be a standard that's addressed in the module itself, but is there another focus that you could use to really build that thinking work? Anyone else? So we'll think about that, Carly, and we'll come back.
Well, I chose science because the teacher and we need to explore the NGSS standards a little bit more, and not just a little bit more, a whole lot more, because neither one of us are very great at it. And I thought it would be a great learning opportunity for both of us. But then what we learned, we could share with the rest of the school. So science is not my comfort zone. So that's why I chose that. And I talked to the teacher about this. I have been working with her with comparing text with different things that her students read. And actually they've gotten really pretty good at that, but I'd like to bump that up a level and have them compare not only text, but some kind of visual media. So like a video clip or whatever, or even a poem, a text, informational text and a poem or something like that, just so they're not always just comparing two text, just kind of another media pitch to it. So that would bump that up a little higher level thinking too. But I chose science because it's not my strength.
And Nancy, that you make a good point about in different content areas, different things count as text. So don't forget that in science, there are lots of things that can count as text, right. Not just what an English teacher would count. So I think a particularly complex data set counts as a text. There's reading, there's analysis, there's all kinds of specialized vocabulary. So if that's what fits, use that. Tables, that kind of thing.
That's a great idea.
And I would definitely encourage checking out, as we get into further, some of the Battelle templates, just because they do look at the unique data sets and how to, how to read, that disciplinary literacy that's required of a science text. How about one more person share? I know we're a little quiet today.
At the high school level, we're doing something similar to Nancy. I'm looking at comparing two texts or two pieces, we're doing a play and an informational piece. And at the high school level, our end of course assessment is going to be based on comparison of text. There's a big move towards that. So the English teacher and I are working on that and trying to, we've been given some wonderful websites to do that with. Also, when we did our on-demand writing scrimmage, we found out that our kids do well with the prompt, but when it comes to reading an informational piece and pulling textual evidence, they really struggle with that because they still wanted to put in their opinion versus backing it up from evidence from the text. So that's why I chose my writing standard. So we're hoping to, we're sort of taking some of our problem areas, identifying them up, and that's our plan of action.
Very good. So as we continue to think about which standards to use and how we think about those in terms of how they really fit together to really get to what we really want our students to do. And again, thinking about all those decision points, those design star decision points that we need to make to craft a quality assignment. I want us to know that just because we wrote that we're doing this standard today in the chat does not mean that I'm going to hold you to the fire to do that. You may down the road as you're designing see that something else may be a better fit. So I want us to think about, our first iteration of our task as that. It's an iteration. We're going to try some things out. We're going to plug around, see how things go. Better to start with something than nothing. So thinking through that today, and again, having these really collaborative conversations with one another will really help us fine tune and craft a really quality assignment. So I'm going to turn it over to Kate so that she can talk about another key decision in task design.
Okay, so I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. And I want that. Okay. Can everyone see the star, the entry point star? Okay, great. So once you've thought through your focus standards, then the next thing to do in terms of designing a task is to select a cognitive demand. So if you'll scroll down with me, the cognitive demand is really where we get into the kind of thinking that we want kids to do. And so Rebecca talked about this earlier, that the teacher she was working with knew the content that he wanted to focus on, and in concept knew what he wanted his kids to be able to do, but in conversation, she was able to push and say, is this really, is this kind of identification, or do you want there to be some bigger analysis, some deeper thinking? And kind of once he was presented with that, he said, oh, no, this is deeper thinking. And that is the question of cognitive demand. So at what level do we want kids to talk about this content and be able to analyze and understand this content? So some examples of cognitive demand would be explain, analyze, compare and contrast, things like that. So I'm going to give you a minute, and I'd like for you to read this section here, the section that's called Selecting a Cognitive Demand or a Template for Your Task. And just read this one section and stop when that white box breaks. So don't move on to exercise, does this template work? Okay, just read this one box for selecting a cognitive demand. All right, can I get a thumbs up from people if you are finished reading that? All right, awesome. Getting a number of them, maybe not all, but I'm going to go ahead and move on. So notice at the bottom it says LDC design tip. The writing mode is built in to looking at the template. So there are some informational templates as well as some argumentative templates. So within that, analysis looks different. But I like the point that they make here. If you just pick one to start with. And there's a 50-50 chance you pick one to start with. And once you start really messing with it and getting in there, you think this is never going to work. Not what I want. And so then you just stop and you switch and you move to another one. That happens all the time. I think it happens to me every single time I write a task. So there's no, it's not like, oh, well, if you knew what you were doing, you would have just picked the right template. No, even when you know what you're doing, you're probably going to pick the wrong template. That's okay. You get in there, you try, you figure out that it's the wrong template by working with it. And then you move and eventually you'll figure out the right one. But the only way you do it is to try one. So we're going to move down, and together we're going to talk about this, the exercise. Does this template work? So I just want to spend a second talking about this and having some conversation. We're going to read this task and then look at the template that they have chosen. And I want to get your feedback on whether or not you think this is an appropriate template for this task, okay? So they've chosen IE5. IE means informational explanatory, and 5 is the comparison level. And this is for an 8th grade ELA course. So the task is, how does language structure shape meaning? After reading Birch's Trees, 13 Ways with Figs, and the Fig Butter Recipe, write an essay in which you compare the effects of different language structures on meaning. Support your decision with evidence from the text. So the question is not deconstruct this whole task. The question is, after reading this, do you feel like informational explanatory comparison is the appropriate template for this task? So if you want to just either out loud or in the chat box, what are your instincts? And don't click on this down here because it's going to give you what the right answer is. And no cheating. And don't be swayed by the fact that my yes button is clicked. It always clicks something.
All right.
There you go. Thanks, Diane.
I clicked yes, but only after long and thought out. I had to go back because I did this earlier because I think I got ahead of myself on the syllabus or something.
Good for you. All right.
So I went back and forth between task templates, and I think there might be one that suits it better, but okay. This is solid, and I would be happy. My judgment always is like, if I saw this coming from somebody I coached, would I be really happy with it? Would I think that would get kids to a good place? Mm-hmm. And I do think it would.
So what is it about this that you think makes it a solid fit?
I think because of the depth of the standard, you're going a little past analysis because you have to use analysis and then comparison. And so I do think that it fits with the depth of the standard and what they're going to do. I think evaluation might be even better to say which one is more effective. But as it stands, especially for 8th grade, I think it's solid.
Okay. Other thoughts? Anyone else? Before I click yes or no and we see what they say the right answer is.
I agree with Diane, mostly because, and especially what she was saying about the evaluate, it's depending on the depth that you want your students to dig into. So for 8th grade, not knowing much about English because I teach social studies, I would say that this works because in the you have your question, which kind of, in my opinion, reflects your content, like language structure, shaping meaning, and you're asking them to compare the articles on how those different language structures affect the meaning of what's being portrayed in the articles. So for me, it's a yes.
All right. Well, let's find out. All right. So I'm gonna click yes since we've had 2 yes votes and no one has said a no vote. I'm gonna click yes and hit submit. Haha, and we were in fact correct. This is, sorry for the fast scroll. This is a lot of information which you can read. This is unfortunately not a short summary, but basically yes. And it's what both of you said really. It's analysis, but then taking it to a different place. That analysis has to happen first before you can compare to, comparing is really analyzing 2 things. So that is a more advanced cognitive demand. A note here while I'm on this screen, if you look at the right-hand side, do you see where my cursor is? Over here under the status bar, there's a green check mark because I'm in this session 4. If I just open session 4, it's a check mark that says like, hey, you've looked at it. And then the exercises, so this is one of the exercises that we've done. So over here, we just did one exercise, and so we've done one and we got that one correct. So you can see 100% total score over here. A lot of these will also have action items, which either link your module or respond to the following questions. And these are not something that if you don't get 100%, we're going to kick you out of this cohort, and no. This is a way for you to ensure that you are kind of following along, and have you missed anything? And that's the reason, or that's why I liked it when I went through in my coaching cohort. I sometimes would not be as intentional as others about reading everything, and I would think that I had seen everything, and then I'd get over here and it says 2 out of 3 complete, and I thought 2 out of 3, I read everything. No, I had not read everything. So it helps me keep myself on track for, have I gone through all of the content for this particular session? So it's just something that you can use to be aware for yourself of where you are as you progress through. All right, so I'm going to turn this back over to Danielle.
Make sure I'm unmuted. So to kind of extend on what Kate stated, the action items that you're now going to see in the sessions moving forward are really going to be a lot about the actual design work that you're doing in the module that you're working on right now. So this is a really great indicator as to, have you done your decision points before you've come to the next session? So that's a great indicator that, again, to keep you on track. So hopefully, as you are working and doing your work on your task, you are using the core sections to drive your work as a means to complete the workflow of writing and making those decisions about the task. We've designed the course in this way for that specific purpose, so that you feel like you're going through professional learning content while it is work embedded, and it feels like you have that coach like on your side. Even though it's a virtual feeling, you still have that support and that help as you're designing this, going through the coursework. So in that action item below the exercise that we just went through with Kate, you'll see that the action item in session 4 that you're going to work through between now and next week is really about setting up and linking your module. It's really important to make sure that you do follow the instructions to link your module, because as you go through the additional sessions, you'll actually be able to pull up that module in the other sessions so that you can keep working on it without having to go out to your library to find it. It's already linked into this course, so that anytime you go and it asks you to work on your module, you can pull it up right within the course. So again, it has those instructions, it has those guiding questions and things that'll help drive you to help you, even though, Kate and I aren't leaning over your shoulder, helping you out. So you'll want to make sure that you link your module here in the instructional cycle, which will help take care of some of these action items. But the other thing you're going to do is you're going to set up your module. And I know that you explored the starter task collection and things like that. So as you're setting up your module, I really do encourage you to check out these options again to see if there is a starter task that aligns with the grade level and the reading standard selection that you've chosen, to see if that's a way that you can start instead of having to start from a blank. And even if these don't necessarily fit, you may want to try a 1 text 1 week or 2 text 1 week module template, because it does give the default skills and mini tasks in the module, so that it does give you a good start to that prior to having to design any work. So you'll see that once you link it, you'll get these action item statuses. So you'll want to make sure that you complete session 4, where you're selecting and editing your focus standards, and then as Kate went through, selecting or changing your task template to really fit the mode in which you want your task to drive. So we have about 3 minutes remaining. So I want to make sure that we go over the next steps. So one of the things that you want to remember, you know, we have that Analyze Standards course that's available to you to work with your 5 teachers between now and week 8 of blended. There is that handout that gives them access. So the Analyze Standards course, you are able to give your teachers access to that so that you can do the CCSS mental markers activity, you can do the analyzing student work and the coding task activity as necessary. I know Nancy was really excited. She was telling before we got started that she's going to use her Zoom account to work with teachers. And I hope that she uses some of those Analyze Standards segments with that group. So I'm really excited to hear how that goes. So I wanted to remind you that this is how you'll be able to give them access. And you do have access until 2 weeks after blended is complete. But we really want you to start using this so we can hear how it's going and have you try that out with your teachers. The other document that we don't have time to go into in great depth, but I want to make sure that you have it available to you while you're doing your design work this week, is this during design responsive coaching questions. So this handout, Kate's going to put a link in the chat to you, and it's also going to be linked on the syllabus. But this gives you some guiding questions that you can use along with using these questions with your teachers around those choice points. So these questions you can ask yourself around selecting focus standards. There are questions specific to the template, the disciplinary content, the writing product. So these are just helpful questions to help guide your thinking so that you don't feel like you're having to do this on your own. You have some questions. And again, thinking about what other people posted in the chat today, what are those natural partnerships that you can reach out and talk to if you have some questions about the design work that you're doing. So between now and next Friday, you're going to want to make sure that you complete session 4. So action items, selecting your task template, you want to link your module, you want to select your focus standards, and then you want to make sure that you also complete session 5 and all those action items, which is filling out the template. Again, you're doing your first iteration. It's not going to be perfect, so don't feel too pressured. Work on it, and we'll come and we'll have more conversations about your design decisions. And again, schedule some time with your partner to complete, the action items together. So thinking about who you can work with to do some thinking. And again, have fun. This is the fun part of it. Plugging and playing. I love how Kimba explains it. It's like a puzzle piece. I'm a big puzzle person. I love hearing when you get that click, and it makes you get that piece in, and then at the end, it's just this beautiful, beautiful piece. So I'm going to stop sharing, and so I can see everyone's lovely face at the end. So we have come to the conclusion of our 3rd session. Again, I'm sorry for the poor weather, and I am so glad that we are back up and running, and I'm so glad that we're picking this up. If you have any questions, Kate and I will stay on afterwards, but we look forward to seeing the great work that you guys are doing on your task. And stay warm and safe. Right. See you next week.
Bye, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.